For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life.
Welcome to Bible Believers Fellowship and the ministry of KJV, BibleBelievers.com. We begin part 1 of our two-part study from Revelation chapter 12, verses 5 and 6. And this study is titled, Israel, 3.5-year Refugees in Petra. Now, I hope you're ready to take some notes, because we're going to move in order to get through all this. Israel, 3.5-year refugees in Petra. That picture over to the side there is Petra. It's the front gate. And just, I think outside of that is Basra. Well, you'll hear that brought up in Bible prophecy studies a lot. And you see these people down here. This was a big ceremony of some type. Not all of them are good. So if you go to Petra, you probably want to make sure you plan ahead like you do if you go to Disney. Gay Day was June 1st, wasn't it? At Disney?
It lasted a week long.
Oh, it's all week? So you got to be careful when you go places. Call ahead and don't just call like Disney, you can't call Disney and ask them. You got to call the local motels. Disney won't tell you when they're having stuff like that because they're afraid they'll get sued for discrimination or something. So we've been studying Revelation slowly for a reason. We've had to lay the groundwork because there's so much false teaching in Revelation 12. We saw that the woman in Revelation 12 is Israel. We saw that the child is Jesus, the dragon is Satan, and the stars are angels. Now, we went at length and discussed that in the previous studies. Now, we're going to read verses 5 and 6, and I want you to note first thing off is that verse 5 will talk about the coming of Jesus the first time, and then they'll skip. The Holy Spirit gives John this to write, and he skips the church age and goes right to the Great Tribulation. In verse 5, Revelation 12, go ahead and read it with me. And she brought forth a man, child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. Verse 6, go ahead and read that. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that she should feed her there 1,260 days. I said that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So look at that. Now, verse 5, she is the woman, Israel, who brought forth the Messiah of Israel, the man-child. He was to rule. It says, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. But he didn't rule because he was rejected. John 1 says he came into his own, and his own received him not. But to them who believe on him, we are given the power to become the sons of God. Why did that happen? Why is this church age even happening? It's because the Jews rejected their Messiah. And that all has within it the implication of everything that happened in his life. He was to rule with a rod of iron, but he didn't. So what happened? Well, he did the miracles, and he was rejected, so he was crucified, buried, rose again. And then it says, and her child was caught up into God. That's the ascension. And to his throne, and that's where he's at right now, seated at the right hand of God the Father. There's a period, next verse, and the woman fled into the wilderness. And that's going to take place in the tribulation period. So you see it just jumped from the 69th to the 70th week. And this is key. We've said it, and every once in a while you're going to get a review on it. You can't understand anything in Bible prophecy unless you get the 70 weeks of Daniel settled in your mind. All the people who send me emails and write me letters and tell me I'm crazy all have one thing in common. They don't understand the 70 weeks of Daniel. And most of them say it was already fulfilled. That's how they explain it. And you do that, you'll go off the deep end. You won't understand what's happening. Of course, the 70 weeks of Daniel is in the setting of the dispensations. You have to understand the dispensations. The dispensations are laid out here in this chart. God created man and woman, put them in a garden, said, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That was their gospel. How many of you are saved that way? Anybody here? No, because it was a different dispensation. They did eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, so that fall took place, and sin passed. Because of sin, death passed upon all men, and for that reason, everybody is going to die. The only people, the exceptions, are like Enoch. The church that's alive at the end of the church age will be raptured up. Enoch is a type of the church, but that's the exception. Everybody else dies. So then you come into, after they were expelled out of the garden, then Cain and Abel and that whole story. Why did that happen? What happened with Cain and Abel? Cain slew Abel because Abel was offering blood sacrifice. You see, there was a way of salvation. It involved faith and offering blood sacrifice. Abel did, Cain didn't. Cain got mad and slew Abel, and that's been going on ever since. And so each dispensation is different. It begins with hope and ends with judgment, and you come down to the law. Exodus 20, Moses is given the law, and they agreed to keep that covenant, and they failed miserably. And when Jesus showed up, it was at the end of law. But at the end of law was this little period of time of 69 weeks of years. That's 69 times 7, and that's 493 years. Now, I'm sorry, I did my math wrong. 483 years. Now, that was prophesied by Daniel in Daniel 9:25 through 27. That 69 weeks was said in Daniel 9. He said that the Messiah would come at the end of 69 weeks. But he prophesied what happened. He would be cut off. Then he said the 70th week would begin when the Antichrist would come. He's not called that there, but that's who is represented there, who would confirm the covenant for 1 week. So since the cutting off of Messiah at the end of the 69 weeks, we've been waiting for, we as the human race, basically, have been waiting for this Antichrist to come. Now, I believe what's holding back the Antichrist from coming is right here, the church. And after the church is removed, then the Antichrist. So don't waste money on these books who tell you they're going to identify the Antichrist and all that. They don't know who he is. They're not going to know who he is until there's a confirmation of a covenant for 7 years with Israel and the global world government. And that will include the right of Israel to rebuild their temple. Now, when that happens, that's when the 70th week starts. But in between the cutting off of the Messiah and the beginning of the 70 weeks with that confirmation of the covenant is this thing that we are, the church. The Old Testament prophets didn't know anything about it. They didn't understand it. One way of portraying it is mountaintops. And the prophets were on the mountaintops, and they could see the mountaintops of prophecy like this. But what they couldn't see was the valley where the church is. Their vision overshot that. But that is the mystery that was given to the Apostle Paul. So when you come into the New Testament, you see Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that's still under law. That's the king under law coming to offer his kingdom to his people, and he's rejected. So then after he's rejected, he's killed, he's buried, he rose from the dead, and the book of Acts is the story of the transition from the law to this church age. By the time Acts is finished, in Acts 28, Paul says, I go to the Gentiles. He was done. That's why Romans 1:16 says, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to them that believe, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. That's talking about the book of Acts. That the gospel went to the Jews first. And a lot of people today get that mixed up, and they think their obligation is to first preach to Jews and then find Gentiles. That's what the book of Acts was. That's not your obligation today. So, the book of Acts is the transition from this into this that none of the prophets knew anything about. John the Baptist didn't know anything about it. He was an Old Testament prophet. And so if you have to read the Bible that way, or you won't understand the Bible in general. And you have to see this 69, 70th week with the church age in it, or you're not going to understand Bible prophecy. So this is our chart on the Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy. And you see that we're not going to rehash the whole thing. We studied that in Daniel, and we'll go over it again in a few weeks, maybe a few months. But Artaxerxes gave a command to rebuild the walls of the city and the city along with the temple. And that began the countdown to the coming of Jesus Christ and the cutting off and the ascension. And the ascension is what was mentioned at the end of verse 5, where he was caught up. Okay? And that then began this church age, and the verse 6 begins here. So in your mind, you see verse 5, that's here, the life of Christ. Verse 6 jumps all the way over to the 70th week of Daniel. And it's easy to see once you get that. But until you get that, you're not going to understand a lot of things. Now, the 69th, 70th week, verse 5 is the 69th week, verse 6 is the 70th week, and the church age is skipped. You see that? Do it again. You get it? Is that a good visual?
Yeah.
Ed, did you see that?
No.
Pay attention. Watch.
Okay.
Ooh, see?
Oh, man.
I knew you missed it because he would have. I didn't hear him say, "Oh man." And I knew if he was watching, he'd said that. So we've repeated this over and over. That's typical Bible prophecy, and that's why you must have the Spirit of God in you in order to understand God's book. It's not just a matter of understanding the dispensations. It's a matter of you having God's Spirit in you. That's what Paul meant in 1 Corinthians 2:14. We studied that months ago on Sunday. But the natural man, that's the unsaved man, receive it. Now let me say this again. The natural man can be you too. You can be not walking in the Spirit and walking in the flesh, and you're the natural man. The natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Go out there and tell them what you believe about the end times. Tell them what you believe about the cross. And they'll say, oh. It's like the little experience that Jenny had talking to somebody today. And then when you're gone, they're like, ooh, did you hear what they were saying? Why? Because they don't have the Spirit of God. That stuff just comes off foolishness. Because God just, created us and He just wants us to be good to each other. The golden rule. Live and let live and be a good person, and then, you'll get to heaven and He'll say, well, you did pretty good. That's what people believe. So when you start telling them, I'm a sinner, I'm a worm, I deserve hell, and Jesus Christ came and shed His blood and died on the cross and was buried and rose again, and I believe that, and that's the only reason I'm not going to rot in hell. Oh. Whoa. They are spiritually discerned. So back to the verse we are going to zero in on, verse 6. It says, the woman fled into the wilderness. Makes no sense to an unsaved man. But when you understand the woman is Israel and they fled into the wilderness, then you got to do a little geography study. Geography, I hated in school. But after I got out of school, I started enjoying it. Because you realize land is what all the wars are about. All wars are about religion. No, they're about land. Now, there's religious bodies like the Vatican who wants your land, but it's still about land. Woman fled into the wilderness, and if you look on a map, you'll see wilderness, by the way, is desert. It's just the way we use words. You have to understand what the biblical use of the word is, desert. And you have the wilderness of Zin, and hey, I got a little thing on here. I'm still learning how to use this. Oh, look at that. I can't point it at you or I'll get arrested, I guess. But this is the wilderness of Zin. Here's Kadesh Barno. That's all wilderness over there. But it's uninhabitable. But Petra is the land of Edom, the land of Esau. It happens to be right here and here. It's kind of all this whole area over here. it is not only inhabitable, it's prepared. And that's what the verse said. Look in Psalm 27:5. Take a note on there. Don't turn there. But in Psalm 27:5, God said He's prepared a place. For in the time of trouble, He shall hide me in His pavilion. Now the word pavilion to us, I kind of thought of, like a nice building, a house. Pavilion actually means caverns. And that's exactly what Petra is, by the way. Look, it says, in the time of trouble, He shall hide me, that's Israel, in His pavilion. In the secret of His tabernacle shall He hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock. What does Petra mean? Rock. Yeah, Peter means like small stone, and Petra is from the same word. Did you put two and two together from what you've studied in the past? The Daniel's 70th week is also called the time of Jacob's trouble. The time of trouble. Not a time of trouble, the time of trouble. And they're going to be upon a rock. That's not just coincidence. Folks, I haven't found any coincidences in the Bible. When you see stuff like that, it's not coincidence. It's the finger of God. It's quite a book. How many of you know it's quite a book? Amen. And it said, where she hath, that she is Israel, hath a place prepared of God. They're going into the desert to a place prepared. There's only one place in the desert prepared, and that's Petra. Now here's a map. You go on a tour, and you're going to start here. Now, I could let Brother Ed give you the tour because he's been there before. But you start in here, and there's all these roads and all these, there's buildings. Well, let me see, the next one here shows it's a 23 square mile area if you were to see the whole thing. And there's all these different buildings that they found, monuments, streets, church buildings, all these things. Now, 23 square miles. Anybody else know of a place 23 square miles? How about Manhattan Island? 23 square miles. How many people are living on Manhattan Island right now?
6 million?
On the Manhattan Island itself, it's just around 2. New York City as a whole,
Right.
yeah. But on Manhattan Island, you got 2 million people living there. And, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Oh, well, let's see. There are way more than 2 million Jews in the world right now, but it says only 1 in 3 at that time in Israel will survive to see Petra. What? There's, I got different stats, and one said 4 million and one 6 million. No, in Israel. Now, here's the thing is, this happens halfway through the tribulation. There'll be a small number of Jews who've been raptured. Very small. But then there will also be Jews that are already killed. So, of all the Jews that are left in Israel, then only 1 out of 3 will make it into Petra. Now, right now, the population of Israel is greater than 6 million, but there's no more than 6 million Jews. And Zechariah 13:8 says, "And it shall come to pass that in all the land," see, it's all the Jews in the land, not all Jews. "All in the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off." Who else was cut off? The Messiah. What happened when he was cut off? He died. That's what that means. 2/3 are going to die. But a third, or the third, shall be left therein. So that's a third. Right now, if it's 6 million, that's 2 million. But that's 2 million that are left after 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation. And so we don't know exactly how that's going to shake out. But look, Zechariah 13:9 says, and I will bring the third part. It says it twice in 2 verses. I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, the Lord is my God. Now we could go into greater detail on this, but this is what I keep telling everybody. The false teachers out there now are saying, oh, the Jews are back in Israel, but they're still in unbelief. And I'm like, yeah, that's what the Bible says is going to happen. It's just like, okay, you just, out of your mouth, you just said what the Bible said would happen. Why are you having trouble with that? Why is that such a problem? They act like we shouldn't respect the Jews in Israel because they're still in unbelief, and since they're not calling on Jesus Christ now, we shouldn't support them. That's insanity. God said this is what would happen, and He still says, you curse them, I'll curse you. Amen? That's what the Bible never says. There's an exception clause to that. You curse the Jews, you get cursed. And they are going to be in unbelief until the end when Jesus comes back to say what's left. After however many millions have already been killed. Now, Petra can hold 2 million people. Now, it'd be tight. I'm not saying it'd be all comfy and everything, and it's not... Right now there are 12 million Jews in the world, but only, I say 4 million here because that's what I kept seeing the number, and Noah Hutchings used that number. And so I'm telling you 4 to 6, even though on the screen I put 4 million. That would leave around 1 to 2 million Jews left to live in Petra. So it pretty much matches up. There's 1 or 2 million that are going to survive, and Petra can hold up to 2 million Jews. Now, here's another fact, is that Petra is 120 miles away from Israel, or from Jerusalem, I think. Where south of Jerusalem, there's not very many Jews living. Jerusalem and Hebron and Tel Aviv, they're all more than 100 miles away from Petra. So they're probably going to have people die just from the trip. The promise is that a third will be there whenever they get to Petra, and then once they get there, that's when Jesus comes back and protects them. He'll protect them for 3.5 years, actually, and then come back and get them at the end. I believe that if you've studied your Old Testament, you remember Jeremiah told them, if you go with Nebuchadnezzar, you'll live. If you go to Egypt or anywhere else, you'll die. And I believe that that'll happen here. I believe that some of these Jews will try to go back to Europe or go back to America or wherever, and they'll die. The only ones that will be protected are the ones in Petra. Daniel tells us that Jordan, including Petra and Edom, will not fall under Antichrist rule, so keep that in mind as well. I showed you on the map how Edom, it covers part of South Israel and Jordan, but Petra is actually in Jordan today. Is that right, Brother Ed? Did you go into Jordan?
I believe that's correct, yes, I did.
Now, Daniel 11:41, I'm not going to fix that, says this about the Antichrist. He shall enter also into the glorious land. That's Israel. And many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon, Jordan. That's where that name comes from. Ammon, Jordan comes from Ammon. Those are all representatives of Jordan. I'll tell you this, we're going to cover this at some other time in depth, but the Palestinians are Jordanian. Okay, the news media won't tell you that. The Palestinians are Jordanians. A huge amount of the so-called Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza came from Jordan. And they are descendants of Edom. Now, if you read your Bible, and you know, I just said, you know that's Esau and his descendants. Do you remember what the Edomites did when the children of Israel were coming out of Egypt? They wouldn't let them pass. and they tried to attack them. Then later, when I believe it was, I can't remember which king it was, they joined up with the Edomites and the Ammonites and the Moabites. All were going to destroy Jehoshaphat, the story of Jehoshaphat. And they were all going to wipe Israel off the map. And the Edomites were so nasty that even their enemies couldn't stand them. And when they fought, they had to stay in their own platoons and everything. They didn't mix with them.
That concludes part 1 of our study from Revelation chapter 12, verses 5 and 6, titled Israel, 3.5-year refugees in Petra. Part 2 of this message is posted as an MP3 download and can be seen as a streaming video, available for viewing at kjvbiblebelievers.com. We have hundreds of audio and video messages available for free download. They are being downloaded and viewed by people from more than 150 different countries in all 50 U.S. states. And you can find other free articles and resources, all by visiting our website, kjvbiblebelievers.com. Send us your letter by clicking on the Contact Us button. That's at kjvbiblebelievers.com. Click Contact Us and send us your letter or your prayer request. You can also write to us by sending your letter to Bible Believers Fellowship, P.O. Box 662, Worthington, Ohio, 43085. That U.S. postal address again is P.O. Box 662, Worthington, Ohio, 43085. If you've enjoyed this Bible study, we encourage you to make Bible reading a part of your daily life. If you read just 3 chapters a day, you will read through the entire Bible in about 1 year. If you could do that every year, you will be amazed at how much you retain and recall just when you need it. Some of you may say, I just don't think God is speaking to me. Well, maybe that is because you are not listening. God speaks to you through His book. And if your first or second language is English, you need to listen to God by reading the King James Bible. We want to be about the Lord's business, but we can only do His business if we are listening to His marching orders. Jesus is coming soon. On behalf of Bible Believers Fellowship, I am Pastor Greg, and we thank you for listening. It is a documented fact. New versions of the Bible are Vatican versions. You will not be told this by most ministries, even though it is a fact. You will not be told this in most Bible colleges and seminaries, even though it is true. New versions are Vatican versions, and you can see the proof laid out in a free 2-hour documentary available to watch in streaming video at kjvbiblebelievers.com, where you will find a link in the right column menu. Just go to kjvbiblebelievers.com and click on New Versions or Vatican Versions. Don't buy the lies. Get the truth and get back to the King James Bible. New Versions or Vatican Versions is also available on DVD for a gift of $10 to cover costs. You can pay by PayPal at kjvbiblebelievers.com. Simply add a note requesting your DVD copy of New Versions or Vatican Versions, or send a check or money order to P.O. Box 662, Worthington, Ohio, 43085. New versions are Vatican versions, and you should be informed. Watch the documentary at kjvbiblebelievers.com and get back to the King James Bible today.